if you go into these little tents, you'll hear real expressions of rage. I was just speaking with someone representing the community of a kibbutz near Oz. They feel that the government has betrayed them repeatedly, betrayed their security on day one, and betrayed them and their fellow residents ever since by not making the release of hostages a priority.
Now, after more than a 2-hour delay this morning, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came into effect, and the first of several planned hostage exchanges is expected to begin in just under an hour's time. Now, the ceasefire was meant to take effect at 6:30 a.m. British time, but it was pushed back when Israeli government said Hamas had failed to provide a list of the 3 Israeli hostages to be released. Hamas leaders blamed a technical issue for the delay. Israel has ceased operations in Gaza since the ceasefire came into force, but Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported that at least 19 people were killed and more than 36 injured just this morning as the Israeli military continued to launch airstrikes. I'm joined now by Reverend Richard Sewell, Dean of St George's College, Jerusalem, who's also involved with the Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza and has been a guest on the show before. Reverend, thank you so much for joining us again. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Alexis, and great to be talking to you on a day with some better news.
Well, tell us a little bit about how the news has been received, not just by you, but also by your staff still at the Al-Ali Hospital.
Well, I think almost everybody is just thrilled at the news. It's been such a long time coming. We've been hoping, working, praying for this for so long, and then finally a breakthrough, which we feared might not actually come about, was realized this morning. And so a huge sense of relief, and all over the land, and especially I know in Gaza, in our hospital, our staff have been literally jumping for joy at the news, which isn't to say that anybody is naive about the fragility of this ceasefire and the hostage and prisoner exchange. It is fragile. It could fall at any moment, and it would be a tragedy if it did. But we've got to be hugely grateful for a breakthrough that will enable, firstly, a stop in the terrible bombings, the killing, the decimation of Gaza, and the release of hostages who themselves and the families have suffered, and prisoners in Israel, not all of whom are convicted terrorists. Some are people who have been held for a very long time without charge or trial, and that we're celebrating that prospect too.
Reverend, can you give us an idea of the state of the hospital in Gaza at the moment? We're getting reports that trucks are already starting to make their way into Gaza, those much-needed aid trucks. What about supplies for hospitals? How quickly do you think they'll be able to reach the hospital?
Well, we just don't know that, but we, are constantly advocating through the right channels for more supplies, not only medical supplies, but food supplies to ensure that our staff and the patients are properly fed, which mostly has not been the case. But we've managed to keep going despite everything. We are one of the few hospitals which has been able to almost remain fully operational, actually to be working massively over capacity. We did receive another missile hit 2 weeks ago, which thankfully did not cause any injuries or deaths because it hit an empty top floor of one of our buildings. Terrifying and terrible that hospitals should be targeted, but we are still fully operational. And if we can get a more reliable supply of medicines and anesthetics and all the things that a hospital needs, then that will be a lifeline. The numbers of seriously injured people in the last 2 and 3 weeks is terrifying because there have been so many civilian casualties over these last few weeks in Gaza City, which is the area that our Al Ahli hospital operates in.
What is your view going forward? And again, very much in mind with how busy and how difficult things have been in the Al Ali hospital. Is it life struggling to get back to normal, or will there always be this worry that this peace deal is so fragile that it might not actually hold up for even for that first phase, which is due to be 6 weeks? How do you get on to work and do your job in a hospital and do all the philanthropic work that you have been involved in with that hanging over you? What does that do to your everyday life?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's not my everyday life that is really in jeopardy or under threat. It's that of our hospital staff, who have been heroic, and it's nothing short of a miracle that they have been able to continue to work almost uninterrupted. I mean, there have been a couple of times when the hospital was told it had to evacuate. There was one occasion when most of our staff were arrested, then released, but sadly, more than half of them were released to Rafah down in the far south, and have not been able to make it back up the difficult journey from the far south to the north in Gaza City, where we are. But the incredible thing is that despite the bombs falling in the immediate vicinity of the hospital, and despite the terror and fear that they have to operate around, they manage to do it day by day, continue to do a professional job in unimaginably difficult circumstances. So I think, although there is this sense that the deal could slip at any time, I am absolutely confident that our staff will continue to do the professional job they've done in even harder circumstances. If they had days and weeks, and please God, it continues indefinitely, no further bombings in the area or in the entire Gaza Strip, that itself will be a huge improvement in the circumstances in which they have to work. So the fear of it failing, of course, is in the background, but the relief of not having bombs falling around the hospital and tanks driving up the road outside the hospital will be such an improvement that I think they will be first and foremost full of gratitude.
Reverend, thank you so much for giving us your time. Always good to speak to you. I'm glad that you are well. Thank you for joining us. Reverend Richard Sewell there, Dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem, who's also involved, as you heard there, with the Al Ali Hospital in Gaza. Let's go now to the town, to the square, Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, I beg your pardon, where Israeli-Palestinian journalist Noga Tarnopolsky has been following the latest developments on the ceasefire negotiations and hostage exchange. Noga, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tell us about the atmosphere at the moment in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. We spoke to you there yesterday. You were talking about how the atmosphere felt a little bit like a tinderbox. What does it feel like today?
It feels like less of a tinderbox, but it's still far from being exultant. Hang on, I'm going to try and move away from the noise here a little bit. What you can see, I'll try and show you. People are just beginning to gather here. The Organization of Families of Hostages has called on the Israeli public at large to join them here at the square in about an hour and a half. Although no one is expecting for the hostages to be released that early. We think it's going to be very late at night. And no one expects to actually see these hostages today, because after 15 months in, Hamas dungeons, they're being really protected. No one knows their condition. They're being protected by the authorities and by their families. I do want to say, you see there are different tents here representing different communities that were invaded in the attacks of October 7th, 2023. And if you go into these little tents, you'll hear real expressions of rage. I was just speaking with someone representing the community of a kibbutz near Oz. They feel that the government has betrayed them repeatedly, betrayed their security on day one, and betrayed them and their fellow residents ever since by not making the release of hostages a priority. The fact that Netanyahu, the prime minister, has lost some ministers today, lost them because Israeli hostages are being released, whereas no one resigned the day the country was invaded and ravaged. This is also provoking real anger. So the emotions here, I'd say, are, complex.
Noga, what will the process be? Do we know? You said we're unlikely to see the hostages today. When do we get news and how do we get news that they have actually been handed over to Israeli authorities?
We will probably first get news about the hostages from the Red Cross. Hamas is expected to hand them over at some point in the next unknown number of hours to Red Cross officials in Gaza, inside the Gaza Strip. The Red Cross will then inform Israel that the hostages are in their hands, in fact, in their vans. Then they will be brought to the Israeli border. I say we're not expected to see them because in the only hostage release plan that has been enacted thus far, in November of 2023, the hostages, the authorities allowed people to film the hostages as they were crossing the border on foot. And it even became a bit of a festival atmosphere. There were too many close-ups of, fathers embracing 6-year-old girls. You might remember the case of Emily Hand. And that kind of invasion of privacy is what they're trying to avoid this time. But we will be informed, and I think the next information we'll see probably, for example, images of Israeli army helicopters carrying them from the border post to hospitals inside Israel.
And do we know where their families will be stationed? These
Yep.
3 hostages who are due to be released, where are their families going to be?
Their families also, they will be awaiting them in protected, concealed rooms with no windows inside the hospital, so that initially, when they first cross the border, they will be greeted by a team put together by the Israeli army that includes social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. There are plans in place to take them to specific hospitals not far from here in Tel Aviv, for example, if their condition is life-threatening or very grave, to take them to more nearby hospitals in the south of the country if they just need to be taken in for observation. And their families are going to be told which hospital to go to, and we'll meet them only there. So initially, they're just going to meet professionals representing the Israeli army.
Noga, as ever, thank you for giving us your time and keeping us abreast with the latest going on. Noga Tarnopolsky there, Israeli-Palestinian journalist, speaking to us from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv.